Hello and welcome to Rule of Carnage. This is another in our continuing series of discussions and conversations about designing better miniature games. And we're here together, Glenn Ford and me, Mike Hutchinson. And we've spent the last few weeks talking about collaboration, thinking about remembering our own sort of experiences collaborating together as a designer and developer on various things. And exploring kind of what we think, what are some of our tips and tricks for being a good sort of designer decision maker in a collaborative relationship versus a contributor or a kind of developer in the design relationship. We spent last week talking about what leading kind of looks like. And I suppose let's flip that over and say, well, if you're not the final decision maker on a game, but you're really interested in the game, you're really excited to contribute, and you want to be part of that process, what are some of the sort of tips for getting the most out of that process, partly so that you can extract the most value and fun from that process yourself, but also so that you can, help that game be the best it can and, maintain a great relationship with that other person and not hack them off, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there is certain position when you're offering feedback, and it's a fair position to take sort of emotionally, is that you're offering your time free and gratis to somebody who's asked for your time. You're not offering feedback. I'm not writing letters to Jamie Stegmaier about the way that Scythe isn't working in green ink. The person has said, please offer me some feedback on this thing. And then you spend probably a good few hours offering feedback on it. There is the perspective that they should just be grateful because you've given them a gift and it was a gift they asked for. How dare they not just be completely grateful? And you know what? It's really hard to get people to look at your game and play test it and give feedback, of any kind. Okay. So yeah, arguably they should just be purely grateful, but they're not always, for various reasons. And it will help you to, be part of that end of the relationship, I think, if you figure out how to present yourself and your point of view to people in a way that is easier to use and has more utility to it. Because a lot of game designers are amateurs, frankly, are not necessarily equipped with all of the skills and tools necessary to process a lot of information coming in, or it coming in a certain way, in a certain form. People communicate in different ways and they don't always lock together. And so you can increase the chances of being part of a design and a process by learning how to present the information you're giving and knowing what information is worth giving when, and when your relationship is going to build and sort of go through to sort of the next step of opening things out. I mean, on a very, very, very basic level, I would say, there are clear stages of information feedback you can give. There is the stage of, this is just a fact, and this is just a fact that has nothing to do even with game design. This is just, this is an out-and-out typo. You know what? Lots of people can put rules up and they're going to be full of typos, and it's going to be a valuable thing to be people's proofreader. It's handy. If you're not sure, if you're not confident in the feedback you're giving, just literally proofread somebody's rules for them, see how they respond, see if they're open to things, if they thank you. It's an easy, quick way of starting off a very basic relationship, in giving feedback. The next stage to that is, there are going to be some rules in every game, particularly if it's early on in the process, that just don't work and clearly don't work and are just legitimately problematic. And if you point out that they are problematic and the way in which they're problematic, if the person is in any way worth their salt and worth the effort of collaborating with, they will see and they will say, oh yeah, I hadn't I hadn't seen that loophole. I hadn't seen that thing. I obviously wouldn't have written that rule if I'd seen it. Thank you. Well, let's work through some other wordings of it. So a good example at the moment, just because it's in my mind, is that in Hobgoblin currently, so with any game with units, you have closing the door as a rule. So guy charges in, and then you want them to be able to go like that for free, a little free movement, just so that the battle line isn't all untied and horrible. And there's a version of Hobgoblin, there has been a version of Hobgoblin where the closing the door rule would basically allowed you to charge and then go and hit someone in the front and then go around to their rear. And pointing out that that rule interpreted in such a way and played in such a way allows you to do that is just a fact that that thing isn't as it was intended. There was always a possibility that I was going to point that out. Mike was going to come back and go, actually, yes, I did intend that. Weirdly, I want people to have a clear front charge and yet end up in the rear of the unit they're charging. And hopefully you would have said, I know it's bizarre, but that's a decision I've made. But if I had pointed out to Mike and Mike had gone, no, that interpretation doesn't exist in any way, shape, or form. It never does that. I know because I've written that rule and I know how it works. There would be
I'm pretty sure there is an example of that where you did something similar and I was just like, Glenn, don't play the game that way. That's just annoying.
And there have been a couple of those moments.
I know you can do that, but you can do that. Nobody else is going to do that.
I mean, yeah, I mean, very, very, very early on like the first iteration of Hobgoblin, there was a version where if you went backwards, you could travel across the back tabletop at like 90 miles an hour. And it was just this weird little exploit where it's like, oh, just a minute. If I set up all of my stuff facing backwards towards you, I can reverse past you and charge you in the rear because I travel at 9 times the speed backwards. What's that about? Because people aren't going to do that. I bloody well am. Yeah, and if you find some of those rules, and those rules are going to exist, you should be able to early on point out those things as breaking, and you should get reasonable feedback on them, and you should find out if somebody is willing to accept that they are not infallible, because there are designers who think that they are, and everybody is fallible. So it's worth checking that early on. And then if you go through those iterations a few times, and they listen to you and they appreciate your feedback, I think at that point, it's the stage to consider moving on to opinions. And it is important to recognize what things are your opinions, what things are your taste, what things you would like to be true about a game. And it's important to recognize that my game is not your game. I could rewrite every game in existence to be the version of the game that I love, would make me very, very happy, and would make other people less happy, and would make the designer of that game completely furious. And it doesn't make the designer of the game right, and it doesn't make me wrong, or vice versa. And be able to recognize that, okay, I think this should be this way, is different from this factually should be a certain way. Recognizing that there's a difference between what I want a game to be and what you want the game to be and what the game is, and these are just emotions and wants and personal peccadillos about a design, and it's worth offering those opinions to see if that's how they feel about it. But I would say start from the factiest of facts on like your first feedbacks, find out how they respond to those points, and work your way through to opinions. Offer opinions only when you've got a bit of a relationship, and recognize which things are opinions and which things aren't. As I say, as we said in these previous conversations, there are an infinite number of good versions of any given game. Your job in offering feedback is to, as early as possible, recognize what is the good version of this game. What is the actual version that's trying to be arrived at, and try and discount those other versions. I mean, when I'm designing something, I know a lot of the things that a game isn't before I know what it is.
Mm.
And it's important to understand that if you're coming to somebody and you're offering feedback, they might not know what the game is yet, and yet they might know what the game isn't already. And the fact that they might be shutting you down in an apparently arbitrary manner, whilst not necessarily being able to answer all of your questions, doesn't mean that they're just being tyrannical for no reason.
Yeah, particularly when the answer is that doesn't feel like it fits, or I'm not sure that's where I'm going. Those are annoying responses potentially.
Absolutely, and they're also the sorts of responses that it takes a certain amount of confidence and relationship to offer to a total stranger. A total stranger, and a potential customer, or user or buyer, because everybody who's working on a game who thinks it's going to go somewhere recognizes that the people who offer feedback on it are going to be some of their first buyers, supporters, and most vociferous supporters when the game comes out. And to admit to those people, you know what, deep down, I don't know what I'm doing. Not really. I don't know. I know what I'm not doing, but I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what this is yet. I've got some. I know this bit. I'm pretty sure about this part here. I really know how all the cogs work here. This stuff is a vague fog of ideas, hopes, and dreams. All I know is that there's no, like, I don't know, goblins in that fog. I'm sure of that. I took all the goblins out, so I can tell you. I can tell you that. I can't tell. And then you say, all right. You're telling me you know what isn't in there. Tell me what is in there. And that's
so I really like the framework of like sort of building up that you've provided there. From my perspective, like to add a few sort of practical ways that you can maybe approach the relationship. I think one thing that I particularly find effective is simply asking questions. So rather than immediately offering a perspective or a point of view or a solution or an option or an opinion, like just ask some questions like, is that supposed to do that? Or like, what's the reason for that being like that? Or what's this supposed to feel like when it works? Because those kinds of open questions are something that allows like can potentially allow a really fruitful open discussion to emerge quite seamlessly. So asking questions rather than immediately kind of jumping to your point of view, it requires humility, but also it's quite it's just a very naturally collaborative thing. And if both people end up sort of in that situation, then that can be really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very important to, you're going to see a rule set and you're going to think, okay, I think that what this game is meant to be is it's meant to be some sort of grim, dark thing, where savage, unfortunate things happen to people and limbs get blown off. And therefore, I think that this rule here is a bit too soft. And it's worth, check yourself, find out if that is the person's intention. And it's worth asking. And that is in itself feedback, because to a good designer, that's saying to them that they haven't been clear enough in the description of their game as to what their game is, which is super valuable. Those are some of the most valuable pieces of feedback, because those are about sort of perspective and interpretation. And if you just say, look, I think this game is meant to be about this moment here, right? And this is meant to be the thing, and it's meant to say this, meant to say that. Am I right or wrong? And if they say, yeah, you've got it bang on, and it's not doing that, thank you. Or if they say, no, it's about something entirely differently, why didn't that come across? You've got another path of sort of communication and working things through. I think one of the things also to bear in mind is that one of the most valuable sources of feedback, for any given set of rules, after all the mechanical stuff and the opinions about the feel and etc., is that my rules make perfect sense to me whenever I write them, because I'm writing in my own...
You lucky man.
but I'm writing in my own sort of voice.
Well, you know what you meant.
Yeah, I know I intended, it was meant to be interpreted like this. Why would you think that? Yeah, etc., etc. And it's super valuable when someone comes in and goes, I didn't read it like that. I didn't understand it like that. I can't pass this sentence. I don't know what this rule intends for me to do. In it with any game, and it's usually the sort of the blind, what they call the blind play testing stage, where you hand the game out to a total stranger. And one of the most valuable parts of that process is finding out whether your rules do what you thought they were going to do when a total stranger reads them.
And particularly that moment of quizzical frustration where someone's like, well, I can't even operate this machine. Like, I don't understand what the starting conditions are or whatever. And that, when I reject board games, it's so often because I'm cross because I can't figure out how to start the engine. And it's normally just because, like, I'm reading a sentence. This happens all the time in fantasy flight games. I'm reading a sentence. I just don't understand what the sentence is trying to. It interacts with 4 other sentences. I don't understand what the interactions are. And getting that from your developers, your play testers, obviously amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And little things like, when you're reading a rule and you were expecting the information pertaining to that rule to have already been presented, and you find out it's presented like 10 pages later, whoever's writing the rules usually has all that information in their head at all times. And so knowing that a piece of information is in the wrong location or in the wrong order is really, really hard to see as a rules writer, as a rule designer, because it's all accessible at all times. As a rules writer, you're the spider at the center of the web. Everything is at your fingertips because it's all your brain matter. And having somebody say, well, this is weird. I came to this thing before that thing, which is odd, because then I was like, super valuable feedback, and again, there are the things where there are facts, that are great to present and find out what sort of person you're working with. There are opinions that I think you should build up to, you should work your way towards, you need a relationship for them. And then there is the point of view that the other person cannot have access to, which should be super valuable feedback. It should be the most valuable feedback you can give. It's sometimes really hard to take as a designer because it's just someone's opinion, but it's like their factual opinion. It's a weird midpoint. And so you should be able to offer it. It should be super valuable. It is possibly an important indicator of how worthwhile as a potential partner that person is, how useful they're going to be in accepting feedback. And so when you want to give those opinions is a matter of, and again, I think personally, when I've gone through this process with other people, I've tried to open with facts and drop in like 1 or 2 perspective opinions, and if they come back, work through, because they don't know if you know anything. There are a lot of people out there who, are offering feedback, which is handy and useful, but they don't have a huge amount of experience with various rule sets and or working through rules or developing rules. And as Mike has said, it's easy to point out where something is broken. It's hard to point out how to fix it. And being able to say, I do know a bit about how to fix these things, I can actually offer a decent fix, is something that you have to respect is earned in those perspectives, and it's worth offering a few handy fixes before building up and assaulting them with like 90 different ways of rewriting all of their rules.
And I think, like, just catching on that last point, I think like it totally varies by the designer that you're kind of offering feedback to, but before you necessarily know whether or not the designer wants to make all the design decisions themselves or is happy making a tapestry of other people's suggestions, and anyway, that's always going to be a situation where the final calls are going to have to be from the designer. I think like pointing to problems and describing like the outcomes that you think ought to be occurring is definitely a softer and more potentially more powerful way of getting your point across, but particularly describing outcomes in terms of like, oh, it's interesting. I sort of felt like this was going to happen and then it didn't. Or aren't we trying to make it so that the three players are a bit more balanced or whatever? And that's like, as you're sort of thinking about the point where you're offering opinions, there's still the opportunity to say, and I think the solution is that we should all get a 3d6 roll at the end of this phase, versus like, I really don't feel like we're like close enough, or that I don't feel like this tank is really like rumbling forward quite enough, and I want it to feel more like it's tough against these weapons or something. Like those kinds of describing the outcomes, I think, is a really decent way to try and not moderate your feedback, but like deliver it with the maximum chance of it landing, because you're not triggering any like, I didn't invent that gremlin that the other person might be harboring. You're instead just presenting a problem, presenting a desirable outcome, and then they can check that and say, actually, that's not the outcome I was looking for. I was looking for, you know, tanks to whiz around like robot wars things, because that's what I'm going for, or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes those questions help a designer to figure out their own game. And you know, a lot of these stages, the reason we call it a collaboration is that you are hammering things out between you. And yeah, understanding that these things don't always have a final shape and there isn't a right answer, and sometimes asking them what they intended can get the response. So times when I've asked Mike what he intended with a certain thing, the response has been, I don't really know, I wasn't sure. Why? What do you think will happen, and are you interested or amused by that happening? Because if so, that'll be what I intended, you know.
Intent is such a slippery thing.
Well, yeah, it's for a while I was the
particularly in a medium with so much emergence, like you
yeah,
don't know, like you intend fun, obviously.
yes, but it's, yeah, did you intend for me to have fun by like blowing up and laughing at the body parts that go flying past, or did you intend me to have fun by, you know, walking through bullets like Superman and flicking people into oblivion because such is my might and indestructibility? And somewhere between the two, you know, did you intend this thing to be scary and upsetting, or did you intend it to, like,
well,
okay.
I mean, the more subtle conversations that we tend to have is like playtesters or collaborators saying, did you intend to allow the like grappling hook to allow me to spin the other character around so that I can pull them backwards through this hedge and they get a -3 on their next combat attack? And I'm like, I mean, intend such a strong word. Like, I was hoping some cool stuff would happen, but like, I don't know. Let's have a look at that and see whether, regardless of what I intended to be true, like, is that true to the fiction? Is it fair from a game sort of balance standpoint?
The rules peculiarly say that if I harpoon you backwards down the lowest part of the ramp, you suddenly jump. Is that what you intended? No, you know that's not what I intended, because no sane person would have intended that. Clearly. Come on, give us a break on these things.
It's the pull back and release wind up car.
Presumably that's what's occurring. No, I was just going to say quickly, because I recently offered some feedback on a Minions game where these sort of bug creatures come in, and it's meant to be this sort of horror setting, and these bug creatures are meant to be terrifying. And Mike recently was, you know, came up with Berserker, and previously I think Bug Planet has a certain amount of this thing of, you know, the point here is it's not about whether or not you kill the bugs, it's about how many you kill, because they're gonna die, and this isn't, you know, this isn't a fair competition. This isn't,
yeah, the bugs are scary, but it's not a one-on-one fight.
Yeah, it's not, this isn't Alien, this is Starship Troopers, you know. And the thing I was offering feedback on, they intended for it to be like Alien, but it was like Starship Troopers. It was just like, I'm not worried about these things. I'm finding them almost amusing as I'm blowing their heads off. It's like, yeah, I've got a 90 million kill count on my death cannon. I am a god. And be able to say like, okay, is this what you meant? Is this what you intended? It feels from your description like these things are meant to be horrifying and terrible. You need to know that they're kind of not. And you know, was that what you meant? Because if you meant it, let's crank this dial up to 11. If you want that dial turned, let's just turn it and let's see what happens. This will be fun. Let's do that together. you know. um yeah so I think in short, when offering feedback, I always feel like, ideas are cheap, but relationships are expensive, and everything you offer is available to be binned straight out. And it's more important you accept that and come to a place where you can work together with somebody than you fight tooth and nail for every single offering that you've dropped to them.
And although ideas are cheap, correctly diagnosing problems is not. Like, that is an incredibly valuable part of the relationship. So I think, like, when your idea doesn't land or get accepted, like, the value potentially that you provided was pointing to the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully, if somebody, as I say, if someone's worth collaborating with, they should be able to say to you, okay, your solution is wrong, but you are right, we need a solution, and maybe we can work together on that. Or maybe I can just offer you some solutions and you can see what you think. But yeah, they should be able to give you proper feedback on things, and you should start developing a relationship. That's what a lot of it's about.
Well, Glenn, I think we worked together very nicely on this series of conversations about collaboration.
I think that yes, it is. This is a splendid collaboration. If you are watching this video still, please do collaborate with us by liking and subscribing, and also join in.
We need the juice. YouTube is powered by juice. These buttons produce juice.
Join in with this conversation. Be part of it. Offer us feedback on what we have said. Offer us feedback on how it has been for you trying to offer feedback on various projects, our projects, other projects. How hard has it been finding feedback? Where do you get the best feedback from, and how do you be a good offerer and acceptor of it? Look us up on social media. But for now, I think it's going to be thank you and goodbye for this episode of Rule of Carnage. So thank you and goodbye.
See you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.